welcome to a show where you will hear about how our liberty is being eroded by the very people that swear an oath to protect it.
Today, the president signed a big new anti-terrorism bill that would expand the government's ability to track down terrorists, but at some cost.
On this show, we will discuss many of the lies that the government that hates us, by the way, we will discuss the lies that the people in positions of power and influence spread every day.
And what is the best way to confuse children? Confuse them about their sexuality, confuse them about their gender, expose them to things that their little brains are not ready for yet. That is how they are confusing children. It is leading to chaos, and Big Daddy government, of course, can be there to pick us all up and take care of us at the end of it.
We will also talk about how current elected leadership at all levels of government has been corrupted by power and control, as well as discuss the types of leadership needed to correct our republic's course.
We the people. It was time to remember that we the people are the government.
Providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians, that's the number one priority for the United States right now.
I am your host, Larry Linton, retired U.S. Navy Command Master Chief and prior Tennessee House of Representatives District 12 candidate, and welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to this week's show, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm on the road again. No Goat Locker studio for a while. I'm down in East Texas at the moment, just outside Tyler, working with some great people in the oil and gas industry. Next up in the coming weeks will be Louisiana and South Texas. And as I told the audience last week, there will be a lot of windshield time on this trip. Also, as I mentioned in the newsletter, I've already encountered some very severe weather. Nothing like the tornadoes that are wreaking havoc everywhere across the country, but close. Severe enough to cause multiple car accidents on the highways and byways that I've been traveling on. As I said, there are still hundreds of miles more between locations with multiple hotels. I'm almost living like a vagabond, but I'm doing what I really enjoy, so it isn't too much of a burden. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask that if you like the content of this program, to please share it on all of your socials as well as with all of your email contacts. You can also like and share all of my socials and subscribe to the blog at libertyleadershipandlies.com. We can't forget that newsletter I mentioned earlier. The latest edition was just sent out this past Wednesday evening. If you would like to receive it, just send an email to Larry at libertyleadershipandlies.com. For this week's topic of leadership, we're going to stick with the theme of last week's episode somewhat. On last week's show, I told you all who I thought was the biggest enemy to the people's liberty in our republic today. I would be interested to hear your thoughts about last week's episode. Who do you think is the bigger enemy of liberty in our country right now? China, Russia, the Democrats, the communists, the economy, terrorists, the invasion along our southern border, government schools, or whatever. Or you just might agree with me that the greatest threat to our liberty is the leadership components of the Republican Party. Meaning people in leadership positions at the local, state, and national level. You can comment with your answer on the episode directly on Spotify, or you can send me an email. Once again, that address is Larry at libertyleadershipandlies.com. There was a great op-ed in the Tennessee Conservative earlier this week by Mark Pulliam that addressed the specific situation here in Tennessee. Steve Hickey also had a piece in the Tennessee Conservative on Wednesday that is a must-read. I've shared it on the blog and on my socials. Please give them both a read. It is necessary to arm yourselves with the facts when you engage with the duplicitous and dangerous leadership right now in the Tennessee Republican Party. For how this week's episode on leadership ties into last week's topic, it is the duplicitous leadership of the Republican Party which makes it a danger to our liberty. As I mentioned in last week's episode, a fake ally who really enables the evil machinations of the communists is the greatest threat. They either enable it or they do nothing to stop the enemy's actions. And they do this all to stay in their positions of power and control. Now, we have several years of evidence of just how deceitful the leadership of the Republican Party has been at the local, state, and national level. Well, the hits keep coming, especially here in Tennessee. You see, our state suffered a huge tragedy last week. On Monday, the 27th of March, a 29-year-old transgender individual walked into a Christian school and murdered 3 9-year-old children along with 3 adult staff members of the school. As I said, it's a horrific tragedy, but it is only made worse by the loss of those innocent lives. Even worse still, though, is this. If this had happened 30, heck, even 20 years ago, it would have been seen for what it actually was. An evil attack on Christians by a person suffering from mental illness. On Christian children and adults. Much as I don't agree with the former Vice President Mike Pence, he is right that using the rules of designating certain crimes as hate crimes, what occurred in Nashville was a hate crime. A hate crime that the current administration won't even acknowledge. It was a hate crime perpetuated on Christians by the mental ill product of our nation's culture and our nation's government schools. This young lady, yes, she was born a woman, this young lady had a long history of mental health issues that were never treated. In fact, her mental illness was exacerbated by a society that elevated her, as well as many other young people in our nation today, elevated that mental illness into a particular badge of honor. When that badge of honor was seemingly under attack, this young woman's mental illness and certain parts of society convinced her that the only recourse was to kill babies and adults at a Christian school. A school, by the way, this young lady had previously attended. It was also a school this young lady decided upon, now get this, because other choices of schools were much better protected. If that is not an argument in favor of hardening schools, I don't know what is. What do you think? Would taxpayer dollars be better spent on protecting our children in schools from the mentally ill in this country? Or how about we continue to allow our government to prop up the corrupt government of Ukraine? You can let me know. Also, it was a school that, in all likelihood, tried to help this young lady deal with her mental illness, instead of celebrating it and exacerbating it. Now let's deal with the Tennessee Republican Party leadership's response to the tragedy. The GOP leadership in the General Assembly has had several opportunities to display true leadership in the days that have followed that tragedy. For example, on the 30th of March, a large group of people, approximately 500, showed up at the Capitol building to demand more gun control laws in response to the murder of those children and adults at the Christian school. Around 400 of those people spilled onto the House gallery floor, interrupting the legislature's business that day. Of course, they had help from 3 representatives, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. But that sounds kind of similar to what happened at the U.S. Capitol on the 6th of January, 2021, doesn't it? Sure, there was some vandalism at the U.S. Capitol, and I'm not aware of any reports of the same thing at the Tennessee Capitol, but the similarity is this. Hundreds of people trespassed into a Capitol building and interrupted the business of a legislative body. Has the GOP leadership called for the arrest and imprisonment without bail of those same people? At least 6 Tennessee state troopers tried to keep the protesters, or rioters and insurrectionists, if we use the same definition that the radical left has used since January 2021. And that term is allowed to be used because of the duplicitous and lack of courage by the Republican Party leadership. And these rioters, though, they pushed through these law enforcement officers to enter the Capitol building. Sounds like assault, or the assault was charged in many cases on January 6th. But anyway, if the situation were reversed, meaning if it were conservatives pushing into the Capitol gallery and into the House floor, shoving law enforcement officers out of the way in the process to protest against, let's say, the pro-abortion or anti-homeschool legislation that is running in our General Assembly right now, And if there was a Communist Party supermajority in the General Assembly, what do you think the outcome would have been? Of course, we all know the answer to that. Is Republican leadership enforcing the rule of law the same way the communists have with regards to the criminal trespass that occurred in Washington, D.C., with the assault on law enforcement officers? Of course not. And they will not do anything of the sort. Why? Well, because of their duplicitous nature. That and a lack of a backbone or a lack of courage. Leadership without courage is dangerous. To top it all off, there was a warning that this would occur as well. Tennessee Democrats, those communists, they advertised for the event to happen in the days and hours leading up to it. In fact, they were encouraging people to attend and, quote, raise your voice at the Capitol to advocate for an end to gun violence and stronger gun laws in Tennessee, unquote. Now, when former President Trump said similar words at the rally in D.C. prior to those riots, he ended up being impeached by the House of Representatives and is apparently still under investigation for inciting an insurrection that day. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is anything similar happening in Tennessee based upon the actions of the communists last week? No. These 3 communist Tennessee legislators have been removed from their committee assignments and locked out of the building and parking facilities right away. But that's only for the time being, up until yesterday's vote to expel them. Because, of course, there has to be some sort of saber rattling from the GOP members of the General Assembly. It is just more of the smoke and mirrors from political leadership that we have discussed on this program before. The actions, or lack of actions, by the Republican leadership in the General Assembly does not stop there either. The precedent has already been set, hasn't it? By taking no definitive, complete action, the Republican leadership in this state further enables, no, scratch that, it emboldens the communists to continue their path of dragging this state and this country into oblivion. And it solidifies the perception of a 2-tiered justice system. Lady Justice is not blindfolded, and if she is, she peeks through and only sees the wrongdoings of Republicans. But heck, it is beyond the perception of a 2-tiered justice system. It is the reality in our nation right now. Republicans, well, not Republicans, scratch that, because for the most part it was conservatives. They protested the obvious fraud in the 2020 general election. And what was the result of their protests? Well, it resulted in the mass removal of 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment protections for those conservative American citizens. Many of them are still being held without bail in what is being called, quite appropriately too, the D.C. Gulag. Because the actions the government has taken against its own citizens would make the Soviet-era leaders of Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, they'd be quite proud. Our own Republican Party's actions, or I should say lack of actions, further enables more election fraud, such as what happened in Arizona in the midterm elections last year. It also allows for the silencing of dissent on only one side of the political spectrum. And if you silence only one side of the spectrum, it enhances or amplifies the other side's message. Weak, cowardly Republican leadership potentiates the actions of the communists. You could see that with the obvious sham of last week's multi-count indictments coming against former President Trump. Leaking contents of a sealed indictment is a crime, by the way. It's a felony, no less. An actual felony, not like the made-up felonies that the Manhattan District Attorney has apparently secured an indictment against former President Trump with. Just imagine if Republicans, all of them, had fought for the equal protection of law. Do you think a George Soros-funded DA like Bragg would have even dared to stretch, bend, and contort the law to set up the precedent-setting indictment of a former president of the United States of America if there were not a 2-tiered justice system in our country? If you don't think that Donald Trump can be found guilty in an upcoming trial in Manhattan, you better think again. Just last week, Douglas Mackey was convicted by a jury in New York City in a federal trial on charges of election interference. What was his crime? Well, he posted a meme on Twitter in 2016 which jokingly encouraged supporters of Hillary Clinton to vote by text in that election. The weaponized federal Department of Justice alleged that his meme constituted election interference. Prosecutors in the case argued the memes were intended to, quote, deprive individuals of their constitutional right to vote, unquote. Further, the U.S. attorney in the meme case stated this, quote, today's verdict proves that the defendant's fraudulent actions crossed the line into criminality and flatly rejects his cynical attempt to use the constitutional right of free speech as a shield for his scheme to subvert the ballot box and suppress the vote, unquote. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, our government hates us so much that a meme will get you the possibility of 10 years in prison. Oh, and there were memes posted by Clinton supporters encouraging Trump voters to do the same thing. Were any of those Clinton supporters, meme makers, ever charged with the same crime? Of course they weren't, because there actually is a two-tier justice system in our republic today. There was absolutely no evidence shown at trial that anyone was deceived by that meme and attempted to vote in the 2016 election by text. Besides, just how can a meme deprive anybody of their constitutional right to vote? I just wish somebody could articulate that fact. A meme that you see while doom scrolling through Twitter can somehow prevent you from voting? Maybe, just maybe, it is an acknowledgement, hear me out on this please, maybe it is an acknowledgement that liberals and commies are incapable of critical thinking and can actually be swayed by or be controlled by a meme, and conservatives who are capable of critical thinking can see that the meme is satire and just laugh about it. So the ruling elite must punish anybody that can sway the weak-minded liberals and commies in our society. I mean, why else only charge a conservative with a crime of creating a meme and not charge the liberals that created a very similar meme? So, is it an acknowledgement that liberals and communists cannot think for themselves and would actually try to vote by text if a meme told them to do so? It's quite possible, and that's why this man was charged. Maybe I should get into the meme-making business. Create a few that shows the absurdity of somebody with male genitalia complaining about menstrual cramps along with the need to purchase feminine hygiene products. Or a meme about men that are wearing makeup and ladies' lingerie, dancing provocatively for children. It's really just a form of grooming. I could go on and on, especially about the garbage in public school curriculums. I mean, if liberals and commies are actually going to follow the directions of memes, let's shift them from satire to truth. It may wake them up. The two-tier justice system also applies to the charges that President Trump is facing. Improper campaign expenditures. Again, the Clinton campaign did the same thing with paying for the infamous PP dossier compiled by the Trump-hating Christopher Steele. This banana republic BS would not be happening if only the leadership of the Republican Party had fought just as hard as their communist counterparts. The commies are working overtime to radically transform this republic into an oligarchy of the woke. Let me tell you, folks, this is a real fight against real evil. And Republican Party leadership is either sitting it out or enabling the enemy. Somebody perfectly captured the lengths the lunatic left will go to in order to accomplish their goals. Bear with me as I go through some quick points about their level of depravity and what they will personally endure to achieve their objectives. Because it would be a mistake to think that everything they do is just for a power play to make us accept them and their way of thinking. Who are the first people in the line of fire, so to speak, for all of what we consider to be their mental illness? I mean, really think about it. Who are the first people in the line of fire for their actions? Well, it would be their children. Because they did not just lock our kids out of school, or make our kids afraid of the air they breathe, or set back our kids' learning with masks and virtual schools, or inoculate our kids with an experimental and often deadly vaccine, or indoctrinate our kids to believe they are either an oppressor or the oppressed, or convince our kids that gender is a construct and they can mutilate their bodies with chemicals and surgeries. They did that to their kids too, their own children. These liberals and commies are committed to the grotesque willingness to practice what they preach on their own children. There's the additional thrill they get from being able to force others that do not think like they do to comply with their gruesomeness as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, these liberals, these commies, actually believe everything that spews from their mouths. The evidence of their commitment to not only inflicting these atrocities on themselves, but also their children, it creates the urgency to inflict these things on other people as well, others that don't think like them. So keep that in mind when you are thinking about who is coming to yours or our rescue. Keep that in mind when you are thinking about, hey, I just want to be left alone. Because they are relentless in their need to inflict their worldview on us all. Because they have already done it to themselves and to their children. There is no stopping or negotiating with them. The duplicitous and dangerous current leadership of the Republican Party has demonstrated they are not willing to stand in the gap between this lunacy and the American public. And many churches have backed out of the fray years ago. Both of them, the political party of the Constitution, meaning the GOP, and the leadership of religious organizations, fellow members of the body of Christ, who we are celebrating the death and resurrection of this weekend, they have taken a step back from these culture wars because they have been myopic to what the end result will be. Those two organizations are not going to come to the rescue until we force them to come to the rescue. Enough on that right now, because it makes my blood boil that leadership cannot see what they are doing to us. Duplicitous and dangerous leadership in the church and in the Republican Party have allowed our republic to be put on this path of self-destruction. But let's get on with another bit of disturbing news. It's another example of the weaponization of federal law enforcement in this country. And it's this. It is stunning news that Dan Bongino revealed on his show this past Monday morning. It would seem that the federal air marshals and the FBI are coordinating to observe and follow people on airplanes that they have deemed to be persons of interest. Which, that would be a good thing if they were following people based upon terrorist activities or links to terrorist groups. That does not seem to be the case 100% of the time, though. It seems they are deeming individuals to be persons of interest, not based upon criminal or terrorist activity, but based upon their politics and their political activity. The federal government may be placing air marshals on planes in seats next to people that have questionable political ties, meaning they are either connected to people that have spoken out about the corruptness of the current regime, or they themselves speak out about it. I would guess that would mean that every time I travel on a plane, which is quite frequently based upon my current client and contract, there may be a federal air marshal seated right next to me. This is where I need to let my wife know to pay attention. Here comes the funny part, honey. Maybe these air marshals, they're hoping to glean some information from my texting on my phone, or what I'm listening to on my headphones, or what I'm reading on the internet or my iPad. Which would be kind of funny if that were to be the case. Because if they are surreptitiously watching what I text when I get on the plane, they would see that I let my wife, my mother, and my business partners know that I've boarded the plane and we're about to take off. But now, here's where it's kind of funny. Denise gets the extra emojis when I text her. Hearts and kissy faces, right, honey? The reverse happens when I land. Now, if they try to hear what I'm listening to on my headphones, that's a bonus. Because I only listen to music when I'm on a plane. No podcast, nothing of the sort. Just music. To be specific, I only listen to praise and worship music when I fly. Because it's very calming for me. So that could be a bonus, right? How, you may ask? Well, by exposing these people to music that glorifies God, it might have an impact on them. And the only other thing I do when I travel on a plane is I sleep. And I know that being seated next to me has got to be a great experience. And I'm not being boastful here, but sarcastic, because when I sleep, I snore. Yes, even sitting upright on a plane, I still snore. How do I know that? Because I snore myself awake several times during my flight. So, if the federal government is purchasing a plane ticket on a seat next to me because of my political beliefs, it's not only a waste of taxpayer money, it informs the government that I keep my family and business partners aware of my location, that I really love my wife and send her cute emojis via text, and of course there's the added bonus that these people doing the bidding of what I consider to be an evil and corrupt organization, they're being exposed to music that serves to glorify the one true God. There will be more on that situation to come out if it develops past the original reporting of Dan Bongino's source. But seriously, all kidding aside on what the federal government would glean from me during my air travel, if true, it is just another piece of the puzzle that when it is complete shows just how much our federal government hates us. A federal government that has been out of control, operating outside of its constitutional limitations for a very long time now. And which should have been held in check by a political party that espouses adherence to constitutional principles. A political party that, because of its duplicitous and dangerous leadership, has forced our republic to reverse course. We are now the laughing stock of the world because our government is always spouting about the word democracy, yet it allows a two-tier justice system attack government's political opponents. Yes, governments, not just the communists, but all of government's political opponents. The government is the ruling elite of both political parties. Well, that is all the time I have for this week's show, ladies and gentlemen. In closing, we have this week's wisdom from God's Word, and today it comes to us from Psalms 50:19. You use your mouth for evil and harness your tongue to deceit. If your declared allies in the fight against the evil that is creeping over our republic are not really your allies, what you have are people in leadership positions using their mouths for evil and their tongues for deceit. They have convinced you that they are coming to the rescue, but just need more of your sweat equity to do the hard work. All the while they are being duplicitous to us all. Take the recent decision or non-decision by the United States Supreme Court just yesterday. They refused to make a decision or to support West Virginia's law that would bar a 12-year-old mentally ill biological male from competing on the girls' track team at the middle school he attends. The court's refusal to protect the female citizens, young and old, in our nation is proof positive that nobody, not even a supposedly conservative majority on the Supreme Court, nobody is coming to our rescue except for ourselves. I've shared several blog posts this past week that demonstrates the depravity of those on the left, along with the lack of true leadership, conservative leadership from members of the Republican Party. All of Tennessee has been witness to the duplicitous actions from county Republican Party leaders in several counties across the state. Then there is the spectacle of what happened in the General Assembly here in Tennessee yesterday. The GOP supermajority proposed resolutions to expel 3 communist members for leading those protests we talked about at the beginning of the show. While a lot of people may cheer what happened, you need to realize that it's just more smoke and mirrors by the ruling elite. It is the trans-publicans throwing some red meat to the right in this state. While I believe the 3 commies should face repercussions for their actions in the House last week, the actual protesters, the rioters, they are not being subjected to any repercussions for their actions. Unlike what happened on January 6, 2021 in our nation's capital. Why? We know the why. Lack of true leadership that will fight the enemy according to the rules of engagement the enemy uses. That, ladies and gentlemen, needs to change and change yesterday. Because until leadership adjusts to the rules of engagement, it isn't leadership, it's surrender. Thank you all for listening this week, and I pray that you enjoy the rest of this Easter weekend. He is risen. Until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.